Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the LCI Talk along with Open Talk by NRI. LCI is a legal platform for education, awareness, and networking for lawyers, law students, and general public as well. One of the most interesting features they have is the forums. Anyone can go, post a question, and they will be answered by the number of experts that LCI has. We also have CCI with us, that is the CA Club of India, which is a similar platform for CAs, CS, and other finance professions. No Rape India is a growing nationwide collective of citizens from all walks of life and areas of expertise. No, we do not have any religious or political affiliations or allegiance. The basic aim of No Rape India is to be a support and action group, is to create first responder networks to help victims and those at risk, to conduct awareness and sensitization activities in educational institutions, corporates, residential complexes, amongst the webinar, the kind of things that we're doing today. It is also for enabling NGOs and other projects in the area. The basic aim is to eradicate sexual violence from India. Open Talk was started last week in collaboration with LCI for a much larger audience. Today we have a very sensitive topic, that is Posh. We have a number of experts. We have our host today, Bhupendra Chaubey, the former executive editor of CNN, who was earlier with NDTV. Then we have with us Vinta Anand, who's an activist and a director of Daily Eye. You must have seen some amazing graphics all over the net. We have Anita, who's an HR professional. We have Ruchika also with us. We also have Jyotika Bhasin, who's an excellent employment lawyer. And without wasting any further time, as Bhupen says, let's talk to Bhupen today.
Well, thanks very much and good evening. Thank you to Gaurav, and thank you to this organization, No Rape India, which has been created by some very sensitive, influential, and thinking minds. My dear friend Ravina Rajkoli has been one of the driving forces behind this No Rape India, and my full support to what this organization really stands for and what this organization really wants to do. As Gaurav has already said, we're today very privileged and in order to have a galaxy of thinking influential minds who certainly know a thing or two about what the law is, Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. Through this webinar, what we really want to do today is to actually inform you, all of you who are watching this broadcast across the country and who would be thinking, why bang in the middle of this corona pandemic, where on one hand, the story is just how bad the story of Indian economy is, and we're talking about anything and everything that could have gone wrong is going wrong these days. But bang in the middle of this corona pandemic, why talk about rape? Why talk about sexual harassment? Why talk about what are the kind of issues which you're really confronted with when you're working at your corporate office, or as somebody pointed out to me a couple of days back, what kind of rules really are in place when you are working from home as well? And frankly, that had set me thinking as well. So without wasting any more time, I want to straight away start first with Jyotika. So Jyotika, if you can unmute yourself and just lay the ground rules for us. Help us understand exactly how should I, as a lay citizen, if I'm an employee of a corporate company, if I'm an employee of a small to medium enterprise, what are the kind of things I, as an employer, must know, and me, as an employee, must know, Jyotika?
Thank you, Bhupen. So the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act is a statute that came out in 2013. Before that, there was just the Vishaka guidelines, which were there, setting forth the do's and the don'ts at a workplace for prevention of sexual harassment. Now, what happens is that most people do not know the meaning of what constitutes sexual harassment. And the first image that leaps to the mind is that someone must have been molested or raped. That's not so as per the provisions of the statute. So first and foremost, as an employee, there should have been a gender sensitization and an introduction to the provisions of the Act. I will start out by defining the term sexual harassment to tell the audience that it has a very, very wide and liberal import. So the definition includes within its purview not only physical, verbal, non-verbal conduct of a sexual nature, but it also includes sexual advances, demands and requests for sexual favors, molestation, sexually nuanced gestures, comments, remarks, jokes, and especially everything that comes streaming through on the WhatsApp and on the Skype. So any kind of behavior which is sexual in nature and flows from the workplace, which is during and in connection with the workplace, whatever is unwelcome sexually determined conduct and not consensual in nature is sexual harassment. So first and foremost, everyone needs to understand that aspect. Yes, should I carry on?
Yeah, please, yes, sure.
There's another thing that everyone must keep in mind, that the definition of sexual harassment, therefore, is not just about a touch. It takes within its purview also that it should not be an implied or an explicit promise for preferential treatment in employment. For example, there may be certain perks that may be offered. Well, you know who is going to give you that promotion. We know who is going to give you that performance appraisal. So let's agree to be friends with benefits. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. That's a preferential treatment in employment, which is offered as a SOP. Or it should not be implied or explicit threat of detrimental treatment in employment. So you have rebuffed my sexual advances, you have said no to me, and therefore you will have to pay and you will have to deal with the consequences. It should not also be anything that threatens an individual's present or future employment status, and should also not interfere with work or create an intimidating or hostile workplace. So therefore, sexual harassment basically falls within two categories, either of a quid pro quo, sexual harassment, tit for tat, working with the enemy, or then it should not be a hostile workplace.
Okay, so let's take that point forward before I bring others in, because I want to set the template of this conversation absolutely clear. And I began by saying that we'd also like to know exactly how much is known about the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. So when you talk about implied preferential treatment, you scratch my back and I scratch yours. How many people actually know this, Jyotika? How many people actually know this, that a sexual act need not necessarily be through a physical contact? It could be through words, it could be verbal in nature, it could be about how between two employees, even a stare, an uncomfortable stare, an unwelcome stare, may just end up being construed as sexual harassment. So throw some light on that as well, as to where does the law stand exactly. Let's say on stare, what is the legal definition of an unwelcome stare?
Yes, a very valid point here, Bhupendra. So the law over a period of time has been evolving. It just does not percolate down to a physical contact or an advance, as I said. It could even be an unwelcome sexual gesture, such as a leery, vulgar look, a stare, a whistle, just a brushing past, or just a comment such as, "You're looking hot," or "You're a Barbie doll." Or it could just even be a sexist joke, which has been forwarded unthinkingly on a WhatsApp message. So the law has changed. Anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, humiliated, which threatens you, which makes you feel that you are insulted, which makes you feel uncomfortable in any manner whatsoever and has a sexual connotation to it, constitutes sexual harassment at the workplace. So now a lot of employees don't know this, and therefore regular trainings have to be conducted by the employer, as has been mandated in the Act. And therefore regular Posh trainings have to be conducted. Now, many employers, what they do is that at the time of induction, they run a Posh module. Many don't even do that. So first and foremost, let me start out by saying that any organization, large, small, mid-sized, if there are 10 or more employees, it is mandated by the Act to have a POSH training for the employees. And it just does not mean...
What does it constitute? Jyotika, that's what I want to know. When you say POSH training,
Yes.
I myself, when I was at Network 18, we were made to undergo these compulsory tests. And in fact, there was a certificate as well, which would be given after you would have completed that training. So I want to know, just so that all our viewers know, when you say mandatory training, is mandatory training just like an interview, like a conversation that you and I are having? Is it like a written test? Is it like you must know the do's and don'ts? This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're not supposed to do. What is the law state on that front?
So when they talk about regular sessions to be conducted to introduce people to the provisions of the Act, what it actually means is that every organization have a policy in place. A policy which states that there is a zero tolerance to sexual harassment at the workplace. Then it must introduce to its employees what constitutes sexual harassment. Also, that there is a body in place, an internal committee. An internal complaints committee is what it was called earlier, an ICC, but now it's called an IC, an internal committee, which would hear the complaint and redress the grievance. So the internal committee actually is like a disciplinary body within the organization. It has the powers which flow to it from the statute. They will investigate a complaint of sexual harassment and come to a conclusion by giving an inquiry report. So that is something that every employee must know about. Also, they must know as to what can be the outcomes of that IC investigation. As in, what happens if the complaint is proven or not proven, or if it is a false complaint, then what are the penalties that are likely to be imposed on a perpetrator of sexual harassment? Are they entitled to any compensation? These are the things that employees must know and what the POSH session must cover. So therefore...
Okay, Jyotika, it's exactly it's just, you've set the ground rules very clearly and you've helped us understand exactly what is it that an employee and an employer must know. Let's now actually look at it from the ground, and let's bring in Vinta Nanda now. So may I request Vinta, who's a well-known professional in the creative fraternity. Thanks very much, Vinta. And good to see you once again. Hope all of you are safe and sound in these times of corona pandemic. But Vinta, look at what Jyotika points out. She lays it out beautifully that this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to know, these are the do's and these are the don'ts. Now let's look at it specifically from the sector that you are involved in the process of filmmaking, serial production, the creative fraternity. All these points which have been made by Jyotika, are they really followed in letter or in spirit when it comes to a contractual obligation, say, between an employer and an employee?
See, the inequality starts from the contractual obligation, from where it begins. Because there's a power structure in place which is in operation. And when you are signing a contract, it's a one-sided contract in our business. And there is no room for negotiation. As a lot of us people in this business know very well, that they are standard contracts, you sign them, or there are enough people who will go and sign them and you can move on. So we are living in a sort of a space where we are subjected to inequality from the moment that we sign a contract. That's one part of it. How are you going to change that entire thinking? I think there's a whole behavioral from what Jyotika says. I mean, it's very interesting stuff. And what leads me to think further from here is the fact that there's an overall behavioral change required. There's a sensitivity that needs to slip into people's existence to realize that when you're meeting someone or you're talking to someone or you're signing someone up, there has to be an equality in that space that you're having that discussion. In that, the person who's bringing the expertise on board is equal to the money that you are putting on the table. Right now, the money is far more important than the expertise that the person is bringing to the table in a creative context. So as a writer, I'm worthless if someone's not paying me money. Whereas I should be equal to the worth of money that I'm getting paid. You know what I'm saying? So that's the inequality, the beginning of the inequality. And then it further goes on. And then secondly, as for a creative person, I can only speak from that perspective. Like Jyotika was explaining a lot. I've listened to it. How much will I absorb? Because there's already an information overload. I'm thinking of even people who are taking flights these days. They're getting into airports and there's so many do's and don'ts that there is nothing of you left in just trying to remember what you need to do next, or you need to have an ID card, or you need to do this. Similarly, all these rules and regulations, there's an information overload. So as a creative individual, I'm finished because I'm just watching my back at every step of the way as I'm walking on in life. So I think all of this that we are talking about here should turn how I think what we really need to talk about is how do we convert what Jyotika has said into changing behaviors of people overall.
So let's take that. Let's take that. And since you talk about changing behavior of people overall, so we know the law, we know the basic provisions as Jyotika has laid it out. But let's look at the Me Too movement, for instance. When the Me Too movement came out, you yourself very bravely you explained your own experiences and what was going on. Where has that Me Too movement gone? I mean, was it just a time bound? Everyone was talking about it. Media was hyperventilating about it. Have you all forgotten about it now?
Well, there's an attempt to forget about it. And I must say that it was not rooted in legality at all, the movement. The movement was a social media and a media-driven movement. And this time around, for the first time, I think the mainstream media as well as social media went hammer and tongue after it, which actually was the reason why even someone like I came out. And I assume that everyone who came out was because they were very well secure with the fact that the media was on your side. Beyond that, what happened was that immediately, I mean, one thing we have to give to the movement is the fact that in our industry, I can speak in context to our industry only, ICs got set up. They were never heard of in our industry before that. Every association, whether it was the Producers Guild of India or the Indian Film and Television Directors Association, the CINTA, in fact, the Cine and Television Artists Association took it up very seriously. So all our associations, including Screenwriters Association, immediately swung into action. They took it upon themselves to set up these spaces in which someone could, redressal could be explored. Also, the fact that then there were these guidelines sent out to all channels, all production houses, etc., etc. Now, for instance, I'm working in a production house where there's no IC. How do you explain that? Because on paper, it's meant to be done. But beyond that, again, it's a factor of time, behavior, attitude towards sexual harassment. The equality debate comes in, etc., etc. But there's one change that has definitely happened in our industry, that what was brazen earlier, I think has gone behind the doors now. Nobody openly, and that's what most of the guys tell me as well, that nobody now openly talks as brazenly as they used to about women. And scripts have changed. The kind of cinema we are making has changed. The kind of stories that are getting mainstream has changed. So there is a little bit of that also taking place, but not enough.
Can I take that on here?
So essentially, you're saying that the whole Me Too movement and the media focus, you believe, has had some kind of positive impact. It may not have had 100% success results, but certainly if you're saying that people are not being brazen about it, people are aware of where it can get them into trouble, well, I would say that that's a step in the right direction. But, before I bring in Anita and Shilpa and bring in the other panelists as well, just to go back to Jyotika, because, a lot of people, Jyotika, a lot of our viewers are asking us this question. So maybe you can throw some light. See, here is Vinta who talks about her own experience, Jyotika. Now the question being raised is that how are you going to deal with false Posh cases? That in cases, and when in this cutthroat world, sometimes male colleagues or female colleagues, they can end up slapping false cases against their colleagues. What does the law state? How does the law protect the rights of an individual who may have been falsely accused in a Posh case.
So, Bhupin, before I go to false and wrong cases, there's a distinction between wrong complaints and false complaints. I'd just like to dwell just for a moment on what Vinta said. You see, the Posh Act is married to the limitation law, and any complaint can be made under Posh by an employee within 3 months from the date of the last incident. Maximum 3 months further. That means within a time frame of 6 months can you raise a complaint under Posh to the IC by any employee. It could be a regular employee, it could be a trainee, it could be an apprentice, it could be a contractual employee, and the IC has to take cognizance of it and investigate the matter. Now, regarding the Me Too movement, I saw that many employers took cognizance of those Me Too complaints, even though they were rooted really back in time and possibly came from previous workplaces or even from the universities or what have you. For the only reason that the employers wanted to ensure a secure and safe workplace for their employees. So if the respondents were working for them, they took cognizance of the Me Too complaint, they investigated it as per the provisions laid down in the Posh Act, and they took action on the reports. Now, in certain cases, not only in the Me Too cases, of course, every law does get violated and many people misuse it, and they do go ahead and they file false complaints. A false complaint is one which is filed by an individual knowing it to be false, deliberately, willfully, they mischievously, with a motivated mindset. It's possible that they want to, extract some revenge, or they want to get back at someone, or they might just be seeking monetary compensation. And for these reasons, a false case may be, put forth by an employee. Now, the law is very clear. If any person makes a false complaint or any witness makes a false deposition, then such an employee or such a witness is also liable to be punished in the same way that the perpetrator would have been punished had the complaint been proven. Right? So that the law is very clear. In fact, last year in July, Justice J.R. Midda of the Delhi High Court has given out a judgment in the case of Anita Suresh, wherein he has imposed a penalty of 50,000 rupees on the complainant for having lodged a false complaint. Right? So the law is absolutely clear. But the false complaint has to come through.
So it's gender neutral. And it's gender neutral, Jyotika. Would it be fair to say that the Posh law is completely gender neutral? It protects the rights of men and women both, or is it still at the end of the day? Is it loaded in favor of women? It's because there's a perception, there is a social perception. Acha aadmi hai gadbad isne kya hoga? He must have done something wrong.
Very good question, Kupan. So the law is the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prohibition, Prevention and Redressal Act. But most companies today have a gender neutral policy. So even though the statute protects women, it is the policy of the company, which is applicable to all employees, that is applicable, that comes into play, and it's gender neutral. And also that applies to sexual harassment by the same sex as well. So we are moving on from there.
Okay, that's true. And now that same-sex relationships also have some legal sanctity, of course it will lead us to different questions as well. But I want to bring in Anita too. Into this one, and maybe Anita, you can unmute yourself. Let's look at it. We know the law. Vinta has specifically spoken about what goes on in the creative fraternity. But Anita, in terms of your experiences, various corporates that you deal with, is there realization? Is there seriousness? I'm only on the point of seriousness. Is there seriousness? This is something that really needs to be followed. This is something that needs to be adhered to.
There are some organizations do follow this mandate program. They have e-learning modules which is given to employees and they are asked to take, large organizations. And I don't know, it's to the spirit of, and really, all of them, if you go and ask employees, are they all aware of the policies, what they can do, how do they raise a complaint? I'm not sure of it, because a lot of the organization doing it is okay, I need to do another aspect. Okay, this is a mandate program, I have an audit to complete. Okay, I have a tick list, that's fine. They're really not checking whether really employees knows about it, or that part is missing.
And what about, is there a sort of a shift that you see, Anita, in terms of your experiences when it comes to big companies? I may belong to a company which has 1,000 employees, and there is someone else who may belong to a company which has, let's say, 15 employees or 20 employees. So is there a difference in the degree of, let's say, seriousness when it comes to whether you're a big company or a small company?
I think it's virtue of small companies. Some of them are not even aware. As far as if the employee count is about 10, you need to have ICC. If less than that, you have a local committee to go to. The employees can go to local committee. But if you really go to each corporate and ask, I'm not sure it is there. I think there needs to be large extent employees needs to be educated. Little more rigor has to be there in probably the audit part of it, saying that employees file those reports. Somebody needs to audit them. Has this happened? I think that more rigor needs to come in place. Having said that, yes, there is improvement in awareness. Social media is also the Me Too movement really helped a lot more people to aware of it. Also, there is people talk about it, so people are aware of it, I would say.
Shilpa, let me bring in Shilpa. Now, specifically on the Me Too question, Vinta says that it has had some kind of positive impact. People are scared to, let's say, brazen it out. I must point out, as long as I was with my company, well, there were some very, very stringent processes which were at play. But realization is one thing. Realization, social stigma, brazenness, Shilpa. Tell me the difference between these three. Do you still get a sense that if you are a big company, big companies have a lot more to lose. So maybe there is greater compliance of laws. But if you're a small company, 10, 20, 30, 40, typically, MSME sector, is there a sentiment, zyada bolenge to gadbad ho jayega? So let's all keep shut. Let's see. Is there still that desire to somehow try and brush the issue under the carpet, Shilpa?
Bhupen, you're spot on. So Vanita said about the Me Too, Jyoti's talked about, how it is important to do it. And Anita talked about small organizations. So a very interesting pattern we see in the industry is that, and across industries, in fact, is that the large corporates understand the need of the compliance and they will adhere to it, they will apply it. As Jyoti also said, that there is gender equality that comes in. So there are a lot of those compliances that also come in. But as the organization becomes smaller, their ability to deal with these things also reduces. And the whole, often we've seen that the attitude becomes the more we educate, the worse it will get, and thus that becomes a big challenge because they will go to the extent of just getting, on paper compliances, but actually not educate their team. And that defeats the purpose actually, and what they do not realize often is also that if you don't sensitize your teams today, it's out there in the market. Everybody knows about this in some sense or the other. As Vanita said, that, it's all available on social media. So then the organization is also putting themselves in jeopardy by not actually adhering to these things or not sensitizing their people that, we do have an IC.
Can I say something?
So there is an interesting question since we're... Yeah, Jyotika, I'm coming to you only. And this is an interesting question which is coming from Nagendra, who wants to know that everyone is saying that that the internal committee, it must provide justice. But how do you deal with a scenario when there could be an allegation that member of IC himself or herself is biased towards a particular party? How do you deal with that question then?
Yes, so I'll just take it on after dealing with what Shilpa said. I'm on the IC for various companies. And what I see is that while the larger companies have complied with the law because they are in a sensitive place. They do not want to be caught on the wrong foot. The Act very, very clearly states that in case there is a non-compliance, there is a fine from rupees 50,000 upwards. If there is a persistent non-compliance, it can even lead to a cancellation of the registration of the company. So as the larger companies and the mid-sized companies are definitely complying with the provisions of having an IC in place. Now, coming to the smaller companies, where there are far more than 10 people in the company, maybe 50, maybe 60, or maybe say up to 100, they have a challenge of putting a competent IC in place and then training that IC to deal with such companies. So that's a big challenge that they face, because many times what I have seen, experience is that the IC is extremely presiding of a person who can deal with these complaints effectively and provide redressal. So there is a lot of senior officers, senior women who can qualify to be on that IC. So many a times we find that the ICs are not properly constituted as per the provisions of the Act. Also, what we find is that many companies, and this is something that I guide and advise all my companies wherever I go, is that please put up notifications in conspicuous places to let your employees know as to who are the members on that IC. So if you have a face-to-face interaction with your employees and impart that into the learning module, as many companies are doing, and introduce the members of your IC to your employees, then it is easier for them to approach those members of the IC panel in case they have a complaint. Otherwise, it's just a name, or possibly they do not even know whom to approach. So these are the basic challenges that come up from the large companies to the small companies. Now, coming to the fact that in the mid-size and the small companies, even in large companies, one second, there may be somebody on that IC panel who has a buyer, who is in some way connected to, or who has a deep prejudice to the complainant, or who has a deep bias towards the respondent. In that case, the complainant or the respondent should, in writing, state and point out as to why that member of that complaint. Now, so the constitution of the IC, as in 4 members, is clearly written that there will be a senior woman who is a presiding officer. There will be 2 other members who are acquainted with social work, who have dealt with women and children, etc., who will be on that panel. And the 4th person will be an NGO member, right? But there is no cap on the maximum number of people who can be there on that IC panel. However, the law is there has to be a minimum quorum of 3 people who hear the complaint, which includes the presiding officer. And there are a number of judgments to say that the external NGO member must form part of the quorum. And 50% of them should be women. So, in case there's concern about one of those members on that IC, by saying that such a person has a bias towards somebody, or there is a past history of a skirmish with that person, and such a person should ideally be recused from that quorum.
Okay. It leads me to another point. Yeah, Anita, I was coming to you. Yeah, Anita, I was coming to you only, Anita. How does this play out, Anita? How does this play out when you are looking maybe at a scenario where an employee may not be, let's say, on full-time payrolls of an organization? If an employee is let's say you're dealing with a third-party organization, if you're dealing with someone who's on a contract, short-term contract, does the employer simply take this position that this is a third party, that we have nothing to do with it? The indemnity bond which is often signed. How do HR professionals then address a question like that?
I think there is a gap because companies, for them, employees, the employees who are on their roll, the permanent employees, or maybe at the most interns could be there. But if they are from third party contractor, I think the companies think it is the contractor's responsibility to train or educate them. It's not necessary about their responsibility. So there could be a gap. The contractor must be thinking they're with the he may not be aware first. Second is he must be thinking they're working for that company as their resource, so it is not my responsibility, or he may not be simply not aware of it. So I see a gap there with the lot of corporates not able to educate their contract employees. I think and specifically when you're saying training, because you need to be providing training to them in regional languages, because most of them are especially from lesser educated backgrounds, and ensuring they understand. So they need to be trained in regional languages and give examples. For example, at our company, what we do, I just want to give an example of that. We do classroom training at for all the third party contractors in local language. We also ask our employees to be the change agents, because then it's not on complete responsibility too much on the HR or training department to train all the employees all the time. We also ask admin to be co-facilitator, and we facilitate these sessions, explain to them about the act through PPTs, through videos. We also give them scenarios to identify what's the right behavior, what's the wrong behavior, what should you do, so that we are ensuring that the knowledge gap is they were clear on what is this.
How many, Anita, tell me one thing. Anita, I have one question. How many people, I began this session by asking Jyotika, how many people in an organization actually know the definition of what is a legally acceptable time limit of a stare? That a stare can be a very unwelcoming gesture. How many people in an organization actually know? Please tell me.
I don't think
it's a seriousness. I'm on the seriousness part. Do people
no,
take it seriously?
I'm not sure. People think that it's a stare is a sexual harassment. I don't think so. Many people take it for granted. No, it's okay. How do you define that? It's a thin line.
May I add to
that's
that?
what I mean.
Yeah, I also have one more point.
Yes.
Point build on Jyotika's point on you have ICC, you have LC committee. There's also Indian Ministry of Women. They have set up a portal for a she box, and it's an online portal. The employee or any female employee has a complaint or he's a victim can lodge a complaint there. Irrespective of you go to IC or you go to local committee, you can lodge a complaint there. But whistleblowers cannot, of course. And this is another forum people can use. I probably put the link in the chat box. People who want to you check out on the website, they could check that. There's another option available for all the employees.
Yes.
Including contractors.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, Anita has put that message. Jyotika, you wanted to come in? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So, Anita, I want to say regarding the
Yes, go ahead, Jyotika.
Regarding the she box, the sexual harassment e-box, it was started initially for government employees and it was extended to private companies. However, once the Ministry of Women and Child receive a complaint of sexual harassment, it is forwarded by the Ministry of Women and Child through that she box to the IC of that company to deal with it, to investigate that complaint and come to a conclusion. So that is how the she box operates. But for example, if there is no IC in that company, there is no internal complaints committee, or possibly, the internal complaints committee is being chaired by possibly the employer themselves, and the employer is the one who is the perpetrator of sexual harassment. In such a case, the employee has an option to go up to the local complaints committee as well, which is founded at the district level. Right? So the LCC or the local complaints committee can also deal with a complaint of sexual harassment. And coming back to the point of contractual employees which you dealt with, I find it very difficult to accept that the legal department or the HR would not know about the definition of the term employee under the provisions of the Act. The Act very, very clearly states that the term employee does not only include within its purview a regular employee or an intern or an apprentice or a trainee, but includes within its purview employees who are engaged by or through the contractor. Therefore, contractual employees are covered by the definition of the Act. And the principal employer, which is the company, cannot just wash off their hands and say, I'm sorry, the sexual harassment was towards a contractual employee or by the contractual employee towards our employees. That is not a plea that any employer can do.
Okay.
So,
I just want to
Bhupendra,
bring
may
in just Shita, one
May I
moment.
just-
Shita, one moment.
Yeah.
I just want to bring in Vinta for a moment because just on this point of contract of various contracts being worked out, where you end up dealing with third-party individuals, the fraternity that Vinta and I both belong to, I mean, all kinds of contracts are always signed, and nobody works here full time for any production house or various groups. Now, for Jyotika, it may be one thing with that to say that it's very difficult for us to believe that an employer does not know what are the responsibilities of a full-time employee versus, let's say, the responsibility of a contractual employee. Please explain to me. When I'm looking at a very simple, straightforward way, when a contract is prepared, Vinta, when a contract is prepared, say between third party, fourth party, and the producers, is anyone really thinking about all this? Is anyone thinking about the kind of points which are being raised by Jyotika today?
Not at all. In fact, not at all. There are standard contracts, like I said earlier, and these contracts are clearly in favor of the employer, whether it is with an employee or with a contractual freelancer or anybody. It's very clearly that everything, we are in the clear, whatever happens in your life is your problem. So that's the truth about the business that we are in. And that also is a misogynistic attitude. It's not just misogyny, needs to be more broadly defined in general for us. Because misogyny is not just about a gender. Misogyny is about a power game that gets played between the more powerful against the person who's less powerful. And as a creative person or a actor or an anchor or a writer, you are less powerful than the person who holds the purse strings. So there will be misogyny that will be at play over there as well. But what I'm thinking after listening to all of this, मेरे को यही लगता है कि इंसान अपना काम करेगा या इन सब छोटी बातों को दिन भर याद करते रहेगा कि यार मैं ये कर दूंगा तो ये होगा, ये करूंगा. Like you said about the stare. You know, how long can you stare and how less? I mean, it's bizarre.
It's legal. It's a legal thing. Yeah, it's defined as per law.
But there are 5 of us in this discussion right now with you, and 4 of us in this discussion right now. We are all well-behaved people. We have been schooled well. We have been taught to behave properly. And that is all that it takes. It takes good schooling, and after that, you will not break the law because, I don't know anything about law because I don't have any legal education in my life, right through school, college, everything, and I'm a creative person. But I don't break the law. Why don't I break the law? Because there was something that I was sensitized to, perhaps,
Well,
as a child. So somewhere I think there has to be a behavior, change.
Yeah, I also think that what really needs to happen is that maybe there is an urgent requirement, and maybe Shilpa can come in there, of us starting with the process of sensitization and us starting with the process of education, maybe at an earlier stage in one's life, so that all these conversations that all of us are having as professionals and adults, maybe these conversations should be had maybe at a school level, maybe at a college level. Maybe there needs to be greater sensitization and greater awareness. Would that be a step in the right direction, Shilpa?
So absolutely, Vipin, that's what I was wanting to mean. When I was hearing Anita and again Jyotika, that the challenge becomes that getting somebody to come in and train the people all the time. So if it's a contractor, you're getting in a contractor. Now it's a very big challenge to say, okay, I'm going to get somebody to come and train the contractor. and time is lost and so on and so forth. That becomes a challenge. How in the COVID times we have actually adopted digitization, how we moved to technology. I think that could be the answer to some of the things. At least I understand the education cannot happen to the IC through online e-learning only, but at least to a basic level to kickstart the whole process. If the onboarding exercise can include the e-learning, on Posh, it becomes extremely easy for people to start understanding that, organizations have this act and they have the IC in place. And even, when you talk about the STAIR, it's a very interesting thing that so we have typically when we do the e-learning, we do a pre-assessment quiz, and we have a very similar question there. And you'll be amazed to know that nobody answers that correctly, right? And to the extent that we don't even extend this Posh to our help. There are provisions in the law to say that the help is also included in it, and she's supposed to work only for a certain amount of time. But nothing of that is, people are not aware. So the challenge is not just about acting or ensuring that you are compliant, but it's also about knowing what is the compliance. And there, I think digitization and digital learning has proved to be a very, very good tool as a kick.
Can I say something here?
Yes, please go ahead.
So I agree completely with you, Shilpa. When one is onboarding, it's perfectly reasonable, and people are onboarded and they are inducted in at different times. So it's great to have an e-learning module just to introduce them to the concept of Posh and the IC, which is there in an organization. However, in my opinion, it cannot be a substitute for the actual training that is to be given to the individuals and to the employees, as well as to the leaders of an organization. Let me just take a very, very small example here. So by having a proper training, the organization is building a culture of respect. And it is that message of a zero tolerance to sexual harassment and a culture of respect that has to be sent out. For example, let me take one random example. If, for example, two male employees are talking about a female colleague and making fun of her and commenting on her body type, right? And there is a manager there who tends to look away and pretend he hasn't heard. Now, in an organization where such a training has been imparted, that manager possibly will not take on the employee right there and then and start contradicting him or pick up a fight. But possibly that manager who has been given a training will call those employees and speak to them and say that, look, this is not appreciated. And this kind of talk should not be, it's just not desirable. So what I am just talking about is not just sticking up. So, and another thing that Vinta said, how much am I going to remember? What all are the do's and don'ts? My God, they're endless. I completely agree. But if it is a culture of respect, where people are having conversations of, including the other gender, treating the other gender as equal, being respectful towards each other, irrespective of gender, all these things, one doesn't really have to think about it. It just comes naturally.
Jyotika, explain to me, Jyotika, and I'll bring in Gaurav after this question, because there are a whole host of questions which are being raised by various lawyers. So Gaurav, do take over after this one. But what we'd really like to know is that at what stage do the cops come in? Because I've seen it from at very close quarters in some cases. There's always this great reluctance to bring in the cops. Does the matter just rest completely with the IC? What if, let's say, someone against whom action is being suggested by the IC, maybe that person feels that the IC is not being fair. The person can then think in terms of going to the court. Do the cops end up acting as a bridge before you go to the courts and the IC then?
Okay. So if a matter comes up before the police, the extent of evidence required is beyond reasonable doubt. It becomes state versus that person, and the complainant becomes a prosecutrix. That's one thing. However, if the matter comes up before the IC the IC will conduct the investigation and conclude it within a period of 90 days. The IC is better suited to the ground to deal with such complaints, to call the witnesses to depose, to take down the statements of the complainant, the respondent, facilitate the cross-examinations, bring forward complainant witnesses, respondent witnesses, and even independent IC witnesses. And the courts are not inclined to interfere with the findings reached by the IC if all the procedures of natural justice have been observed in conducting the inquiry. Therefore, the IC is a civil mechanism which has been provided instead of going to the police. However, in case a complainant wants to go to the police, it is the duty of the IC to assist that complainant to go up to the police. Let me give you an example. Now, there was an interesting case wherein this girl, she had gone for an offsite with one of the leading multinationals in Gurgaon. She had gone for an offsite, and there was a date drug that was mixed in her drink by her manager. And the next morning, when she woke up, she could not even walk to the washroom. She realized that something was not right with her, but a lot of people had left the resort by that time. Anyhow, she picked herself up. She went to a private nursing home who refused to, kind of give her a medico-legal certificate and told her to go to the government hospital, which wanted to contact the police, and she didn't want to. Eventually, she came back to the IC because very clearly she had been raped. And even though the IC suggested to her that it was a criminal act, and the IC went back to the five-star hotel and got a CCTV footage of those corridors, found that 3 men had entered her room and she had been gang raped, despite the fact that the IC constantly told her to raise that complaint to the police, that girl was not comfortable with it. She was scared for her own reputation. She did not want to get involved with the police. She did not want the organization to know. And eventually, though the IC terminated those 3 people, but had it gone to the police and had it withstood with the police, those people would have got any time, a punishment 7 years upwards. So we could not have gone against what the complainant wanted. Now, for example, the Genpact case. Here is a young 38-year-old who is accused of sexual harassment at the workplace by 2 female colleagues. Immediately, the IC calls in for his iCard. The IC calls in and tells him that he must give in his laptop, right? Even before the IC has heard him, right? So the matter was not handled with sensitivity or confidentiality, right? So the wife of this young executive goes forth and she lodges a police complaint against the company and against the IC. However, you cannot hold the IC responsible for abetment of suicide in this case. So the police does get involved where the complainant wants to lodge a complaint, or in this case of Genpact, where the respondent's wife has gone forth against the IC and the company for not having handled the matter.
Okay. There are a whole host of questions. There are a whole host of questions which are coming from a lot of people who are watching this webinar right now. So let me toss it across to Gaurav, who's compiled a whole list of questions, and then maybe all of you can enter. And I'll take your leave because the internet is also playing up, but Gaurav is there. Thanks so much, Jyotika. Thanks so much, Anita, Shifa, and Vita for joining us. Thanks so much.
So we'll now straight away move to the questions. Anita, I suppose the first question you can take, it says sometimes victims are put under the fear to be fired if disclosed, if they disclose the incident. So in such cases, whom can they rely on? Since you're an HR, so you can elaborate more on this.
See, there is an IC, they're doing their job. So I think they have to report it to the IC. That's the first step they need to take. And it's the IC's responsibility to keep that confidentiality. I think Jyotika just brought up one incident where, IC needs to be sensitive that this is information needs to be confidential, and they also have a responsibility towards it. They can feel comfortable if there is a complaint. Either they can reach out to the senior most female employee in the organization, who they are comfortable sharing that incident, they could do that. And from there, IC can take over and see what best they can do to protect the person's identity as well.
Great. Jyotika, if you can add on to that.
At the time when the IC initiates the investigation, the procedure of the investigation has to be clearly explained to the complainant as well as to the respondent and to the witnesses. So as a part of the procedure, it will be explained that all principles of natural justice, equity, and fair play will be observed in conducting the inquiry proceedings. And it will be explained to each one of the parties being the complainant, the respondent, and the witnesses, that no vindictive or retaliatory action will be taken against them for participating in the inquiry. Now, supposing there is a backlash, then at that stage, those employees, as Anita said, can come back to the IC and prove that, look, because I made this deposition, this is the backlash I am facing. Or they can escalate it to the senior management.
Great, thank you so much. A very quick question. Companies with just 10 employees and small enterprises in smaller places, do they need to follow this? Because this can be connected to another question that we received over the email, that let's say they have 12 employees or they have ad hoc employees. Today there are offices where there is a consultancy service that a person comes a month, doesn't come the next month. In that scenario, if I do not have continuously 10 employees or just 11 and 12 sometimes, what do companies like that do?
They are mandated to have an internal complaints committee in place. The reason for that is that such companies are constantly dealing with customers, they are dealing with clients, they are dealing with donors, they are dealing with contractual employees, they are dealing with, so the sexual harassment can be by one of their employees towards a customer or a client as well, right? Or vice versa. So they are mandated to have an internal complaints committee in place.
Great, thank you. The next question, I suppose, can be taken by Anita or by Vinta also. It says, when a new employee joins the company, how and when do we introduce the company's policy on sexual harassment to them or any other procedure? What is the right time or the right way to introduce an employee to that?
Okay, I will take that. You also see, HR does the induction at the first day. Most of the organization, they introduce the HR. Every organization has a HR Posh policy in place. They explain to them all the HR policies, including Posh policy. Post that they have a training program provided. Most of the companies nowadays have e-learning modules given to the employees, and expected, it's a mandate, so they expected to go through that. That's what most of the organization do. Shilpa, you could probably add if you have any other points.
No, that's absolutely in sync. So a good e-learning module helps educate, and get them to understand, become aware, recognize, prevent, and also about the redressal policies. So that encompasses everything.
Great. We have a few more questions. One of the most interesting questions today is, and I suppose we discussed this in the past also, Jyotika, what do we do in today's scenario? The pandemic is there. A lot of people are now working from home. How does sexual harassment on Zoom calls, Google Meet, or all this technology, is it possible? If it is, how do people note it? And what are their remedies against such things?
So there is a notional extension of the workplace. If the definition of the term workplace extends to employees traveling in cabs or at airports or client offices or customer sites, when they are working out of home during a pandemic, possibly on Skype or on Zoom or even on WhatsApp, there is a notional extension of time and space to the house as well. And there is a set of professional etiquette that has to be followed. It cannot be breached at all. So there is no question of, kind of using expletive language or making a sexual gesture or not being appropriately dressed For example, there was a lawyer in Rajasthan who appeared before a judge of the Rajasthan High Court wearing just a banyan. And there was an order by the High Court asking the lawyer to be properly in uniform and for all lawyers to be in uniform for attending a proceeding before the court. So at the time when people are on that Skype call or they are on that Zoom call, it will be deemed that they are at work and at the workplace. Hence, there can be no sexual harassment there. If there is any sexual harassment or any kind of behavior which qualifies as sexual harassment, then it will fall within the purview of Posh.
Great, thank you. Anita, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I wanted a couple of things. There are quite a lot of people, they have done a survey that, a lot of the employees in the urban sector now working from home. In the corporates, you have Slack, you have Teams, Google Talk, all of that becomes official channels. People can create their own channels and post, messages. You need to be very aware because these can be, do not share any sexually explicit or suggestive messages on that forum. Other thing I wanted to bring up is nowadays people are working long hours. And, it's important that just because they're working long hours, be aware not to send chat messages, one-on-one messages to odd hours to employees. Other one, female employees sometimes are not comfortable coming on the video call. They're not camera ready. The managers or the team members need to be sensitive about it. If they are not ready to, you cannot insist on switching on the video. Allow them to be on the audio. Other part was, as Jyotika mentioned, your attire is very important. You have, undergarments, your tees about messages, what you wear. Also, your Zoom background. The messages are pictures displayed. You can't, this is my house, this is how I live. You cannot, you're the workplace as she defined. So it's important to have that, participant background, what is in the privy to the background. The other part is that, sometimes, just to lighten the mood, people crack jokes. We are just starting a call, let me pass, crack a joke. It's important to be professional, maintain that professional etiquette, and keep the office meetings during office hours. Especially do not call one-on-one meetings odd hours. Give respect. That we are extending hours, but does not mean other person not comfortable. Please do not schedule. Keep your communication formal, because just because you're in a home front environment, it's easy to switch off and say, forget about basic workplace norms. One-on-one conversation just can slip into your casual conversation, discuss about appearance, attire, and sometimes it can make another person very uncomfortable about it. These are a couple of things. And another thing I also want to bring it up is cyber stalking. So a lot of people have time in hand, you tend to check on Facebook profile, Twitter, you also have TikTok videos made, be aware of these mediums, sending frequent messages, posting sexual messages to, comments about your co-workers on these platforms. Please avoid it so that, you are safe and your colleagues are also comfortable and safe in the online working from home as well.
Thank you.
Answer this for a moment, please.
Yes, please, Jyotika.
So, Anita, there is something that I have advised a lot of companies whom I work with, that there should just be a short paragraph that they can circulate as a part of corporate good practice to their employees who are working out of home. And in that paragraph, the very points that you have mentioned, that please keep your work meetings, during office hours, please be respectful, please be properly attired, and things like that, those should be incorporated as points. So if it goes out as a mandate by the HR to all employees, because everybody is working from home, it kind of brings home to them that the company is watching out for them, is making sure that there is a secure workplace even beyond the precincts or the premises of the office.
Perfectly agree, Jyotika, because I think the Economic Times survey said that there are around 3 million working population right now working from home. That's a huge number. I think it's a good suggestion. Thank you.
And I am dealing with some cases which are flowing from sexual harassment on work from home portals.
Great, thank you. Shilpa, the next question is for you. It's a rather interesting question. It says, on the whole, Posh training remains simply a tick mark for the HR directors to confirm to, just to complete their list of activities. Rarely is there an HR director whom one can turn to and expect immediate and fair action to be taken. Invariably, they take the side of the seniors since they're still in the employment. How do you propose to address this?
So, the first and foremost aspect that comes in is that it should not be a checkbox activity, and therefore there are now good technology systems in place which can actually ensure that you've gone through the module completely, you've gone through each and every aspect of it, you have actually sat through some of the scenarios that, Jyotika was talking about, and also to the extent that, you actually pass that test. So there is a test that is given typically that you've got to pass that test with a certain amount of credits so that you have actually, it gives back to the organization that you have gone through that. That's one aspect of it. There's certification involved and so on and so forth. So that is the starting point. And then once the IC is there, once the HR is there, because you've gone through it, and if you feel the HR is also always on the, aware of these things, or they get reports of this, that when they see somebody acting out, it becomes more imperative for them, like Jyotika was saying, take the next step with such employees to say, get them to do face-to-face activities, face-to-face trainings, where that becomes then an additional checkpoint to ensure that people who are prone to doing things like these are, you're ensuring that the organization is doing their bit to make sure that they're not, behaving out of the normal. That becomes a very, very important aspect, and then that's where the blend of, technology versus the face-to-face comes in. And like Jyotika was saying that, what tends to happen is that one is not talking only of digitization or digital, but if you look at it today that, we are not being able to meet, but we are meeting in a Zoom call. I'm not sure how much of this would have been possible if we would have been, going to offices on a normal this thing. So because of COVID, there's a lot of technology adoption. And I think that can become a big facilitation tool. They can also periodic training. So something that was done as one-time activity can happen more often now, So if you see somebody doing it, that becomes a mandate for them to go back to it again and again and again to ensure that it's getting into their system.
Great, thank you. The next question is by Geeta. Jyotika, I suppose you can take it. It is, what is the role of a contracting company? Are they even supposed to have an IC to step in when their employees harassed by the main company? Okay, we see Jyotika might have some network issues. Anita, if you could take that, please.
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, so it is, what is the role of a contracting company when, do they need to have an internal complaints committee when one of their employees harassed?
Yes, they need to. The definition of any organization, if the employer have more than 10 employees, they need to have internal committee. So it's their responsibility. Employee can go to their contracting companies or the company they're been using their services. The options are available for both. Gaurav, you're on mute.
Yes, Jyotika is back. Jyotika, could you answer this one?
I'm sorry, can I just hear that question again, because I had a little technical glitch.
So the question is, does the contracting company also need to have an IC when one of their employees harassed?
Absolutely. So who is the person who will take action against the perpetrator or the alleged harasser? It is the employer who has the right to take action against his own employee. Therefore, in case one of the contractual employees has committed sexual harassment, it is the IC of that contractual employee will conduct the investigation and will, give out the penalty or the punishment or whatsoever. So therefore, there should be an IC in place for that contractual company as well.
Great, thank you. We have a lot of chats, a lot of, I would say, questions about how do we deal with one, false complaints. Let's say after the inquiry, a complaint turns out to be false and the employee's already left the company. How do we address that situation? Is there any recourse for the boss or the male employee who was harassed by such a process?
Yes. So, just to clarify this whole thing, number one, if there is a false complaint and if the perpetrator has left the company, the IC first and foremost has the powers of a civil court, which means that the IC can summon witnesses, the IC can bring forth documents, the IC can examine IC witnesses to come and depose in the inquiry. The IC has followed the entire procedure which has been put forth by the handbook of ministry, by the Ministry of Women and Child. And once they give their recommendations, those recommendations are mandatory and binding on the employer. So if the IC comes to the conclusion that it's a false complaint, they will obviously suggest some sort of recommendation, some sort of a penalty, some sort of a punishment against the person who has made that false complaint. Now, in case that person has already left the company, monetary compensation can be sought from such a person. Okay? So that can be recovered as an area of land revenue. The act is very, very clear that wherever and in whichever case the IC orders that there will be a monetary compensation to be paid to the complainant or to the respondent in this particular case of a false complaint, then it can be recovered as an area of land revenue. Okay, there is one question which is repeatedly coming up from Veenu Kakkar regarding the recommendations.
Yes.
Can I just take that question, please?
And then you have two more connected questions by Veenu, so we'll address those also.
Okay. Would you like to ask the question?
No, go ahead, answer, please.
The question that she asks is, what happens when a recommendation is not followed by an employer? So I will take this up first. What happens is that there is a procedure of the investigation that has to be followed. That means that once the entire evidence has been taken on the record, the cross-examinations are complete, the findings and conclusions have been reached, they have been shared with the parties for their final representations, if any. The IC has considered them. The IC will come forth with a few recommendations which they will make to the employer. The inquiry report along with the recommendations will be shared with the complainant, with the respondent, and with the employer. Therefore, the employer in question has to implement the recommendations within a period of 60 days. If the complainant, the respondent, or the employer is not satisfied or does not agree with the recommendations, then in that case, they can prefer an appeal against those recommendations, against that inquiry report to the appellate authority, which is constituted under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act. Normally, it is the presiding officer of the labor court or it is a magistrate level person. So you can go up in appeal within a period of 90 days from the date when the inquiry report is shared. At that point of time, the appellate authority will look into the matter and see as to why those recommendations are not being implemented. If the employer has not done it, then action will be taken against the employer. If the recommendations are not in order, then the appellate authority will, kind of question as to why those recommendations were made, or whether they, are vindictive or they are not complete, or, then the appellate authority will give their finding on that subject.
Great. Jyotika, if you could address the next follow-up question also. Very quick answer to this one. So the time-bound inquiries have now come to a halt during the lockdown. What do we do about these?
So I am conducting a lot of inquiries online. Now, in fact, there was a case, Gaurav, recently, wherein a complaint was made against 7 perpetrators by a female colleague. It was against her whole team. She was working in the night shift. And she also made a complaint against her supervisor and against her manager. The reason why she made them parties to the complaint was because she said that I went and made a complaint and even furnished evidence of being sexually harassed by these 7 respondents. Now, because it took so long to take, the evidence of 7 respondents, bring forward their cross-examinations, take into consideration the complainant witnesses, bring forward the management, the manager, the supervisor, etc., we were unable to complete the inquiry within 90 days. So, for reasons to be recorded in writing, the IC has to give a justification for reasons to be recorded in writing. There has to be a justifiable reason as to why was the inquiry not, completed within the time frame of 90 days. But you just can't say, okay, I'm sorry, there's a lockdown, and now it'll just span out over 2 years or 3 years or whatsoever. It just cannot be like that. So if all reasonable precautions have been taken to wrap up the inquiry at the earliest possible, it has to be done.
Great. Thank
or
you.
else the inquiry will not withstand in a court of law.
Yes. Shilpa, if you could answer this one, and then Anita can also probably answer the follow-up question. The Posh similar laws actually discourage employers from employing female workers and staff. Could you address this? Like, how do they deal with it? Or does it actually happen? Because I feel that, yes, this actually does happen. How do we deal with this?
So absolutely, Gaurav, this and the other acts where there's maternity, paternity, etc., those acts as well are becoming deterrents for people to actually employ women workers. At the same time, I think what also we will see is that women employees are far more productive. They're giving far more sincere to the organization. So if you start weighing those benefits over what these acts, what the compliances need to be done, people still realize that there is a lot to add when women are there. There's a conducive atmosphere in the organization. There is also, even because of this act for that matter, you'll see that there is a certain decorum in the organization. So those things lend itself to a much more professional environment, a much more cohesive environment. And thus the organizations, given these acts, also still want to go ahead and employ women workers. Now, Anita, over to you to add to that.
Yeah, totally agree, because you also have, a lot of the organizations also want to maintain the gender parity. This data, which is a lot more push to have women employees, so that your creativity, a lot more different thought process coming into the workplace, and so resolving issues, all of that adds to works other way around, also saying that we need to have more women employees in the workplace.
Great. Thank you, Jyotika. The next question is to you. Is there anything as verbal sexual harassment? And how do we address that?
Absolutely. Definitely. Verbal or non-verbal sexual harassment. Non-verbal, of course, is gestures, the leery looks, the catcalls, the whistles, and the winks. Right? Verbal. Hi, sweetie. Hi, hottie. How are you doing, darling? Not using a name. Possibly passing sexist comments. It's not what is being said. It is how it's being said many a times. So, an occasional compliment might not be sexual harassment. You're looking very nice today. And yet, if someone else walks in and you say, oh, you're looking very nice today, and looks you up and down, suddenly the other person is extremely and distinctly uncomfortable. Right? So, you're looking so hot. Oh my God, you're just a Barbie doll. You look best in white. In one of the cases that I had, the comment that was passed was, oh my God, you look best in white, just like Mandakini. I wish there was a shower. So this was one of the complaints I had received. So definitely, Verbal sexual harassment falls within the purview of Posh.
Thank you. Anita, this is an interesting question for you. Yes,
One-
Jyoti,
Oh, sorry. I just want to make one distinction here. Please, I'm so sorry.
go ahead.
Verbal sexual harassment is distinct from workplace bullying. So, for example, if there is a personal bias, or if you just don't like someone and there is a prejudice against that person, it could be a racial prejudice, it could be coming out of a religious a religious prejudice or whatsoever, and you have been bullying that person, discriminating against that person, but it has no underlying sexual harassment at all, then it does not fall within the purview of Posh. It will be dealt by with the HR of the company. In case there is an underlying sexual connotation to that verbal harassment, then it will be dealt with under the provisions of Posh by the IC.
Thank you. Anita, the question is to you now. In the new era of startup organizations, the culture of young employees is very casual, and it is very difficult at times, to term a passing of any comment as sexual harassment. How do we deal with this? This I personally would want to know.
Yeah, it is. It's important that organizations take the responsibility, educating them. You have policies in place. It's important. People coming in, especially from the colleges to corporates. There's a big change for the corporate to campus to corporate. So you need to educate them. That is a responsibility of the organization to ensure that the day when you're onboarding, you have those checks in place, educating with the policies, having those sessions with them, and subtly do's and don'ts, etiquettes needs to be taught to them or explained to them. That's the only way you can ensure that these things are imbibed into them. It's a respect for employees on the other side as well.
Great. Shilpa, if you can add something to that.
Um, uh, I think Anita's covered it, essentially, but it's really about, what Vinita was saying initially, that it is an internal calling. If you address it decently, you yourself are somebody who is willing to respect, then this is, most of it gets taken care of. Then there is only very little that remains, which needs to be, you need to be educated about. The rest is just really an attitude towards these things.
Yeah, it's more to do with the building culture in the organization. Be it
Yeah.
a startup or established organization, it's a leader's responsibility to reiterate that same rules of professional apply across. So with the startup, they work from coffee centers to everywhere. Workplace is workplace, so they need to follow those etiquettes.
Thank you. Jyotika, the next is a rather interesting question for you. Savita wants to know if you could list the do's and the don'ts that you recommend to companies to be circulated to all the employees working from home.
Number one, know that there is a Posh policy in place, that it extends to the workplace, which is now your home, because there is a notional extension of the workplace. And therefore, the professional etiquettes also extend to the workplace. B, in case there is a concern, you always have the IC, which is fully functional, to come back to for redressal. That you must feel safe even when you are working out of home. Number three, there is a certain etiquette that each person should follow. I think Anita had summed this up beautifully. She had said that all Zoom calls, Skype calls, and others should be during office hours. So we should try to maintain that respect. Now, a lot of IT companies will come back to me and say, well, we were only working night shifts. And possibly they still are, because a lot of my clients are working to capacity and they are working in their night shifts, so that those are their work hours. But be in a proper professional attire. Speak respectfully as you would when you were within the precincts of the company. And there should be no comments about your personal appearance. Just because you're working out of home, that does not mean that it gives you the liberty to comment on somebody's home decor or how that person is looking, etc. So as long as we are maintaining these these basic do's and don'ts, I think we should be sorted.
Thank you. The next question is by Rupali. Is there a mandate on stare, a duration, legally? Anything that you could say about that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that, Gaurav.
So Rupali wants to know, is there any mandate on when you say that, even if I stare at someone, that can be sexual harassment? Like, is there a duration, like for a minute, a few seconds? Like, what is the legal position on that?
It is the perception of the person who feels harassed. So, for example, you may be, okay, so just talking about a social culture. Just one generation ago, when our mothers went to work, they folded their hands by way of a greeting. Subsequently, when the Western culture came into being, we started shaking hands. Today, when young people come into work, they meet each other with a semi-hug. Therefore, there has been a bridging of the proximity that they are in, the physical proximity. It could be perfectly fine for somebody to be hugged. It might not be okay for someone even to shake hands with another. So, coming to a stare, what is the perception of the person? We are all wired in such a way that we know a good look from a bad look. Anything that makes you feel insulted, humiliated, discriminated against, uncomfortable, constitutes harassment. And first and foremost, the first thing that you need to do is to communicate to the other person that you're not comfortable with it. Because possibly the other person does not even know that you're uncomfortable with it.
Thank you. Anita, the next question is to you. This is about, I would say, the professionals. So lawyers, CAs, young professionals, consultancies, startups. So, we have a tendency that if I am a small office today, let's say, I would say if it's a small law firm or a small office, usually it's under the 10 employee situation, and we don't even usually have HRs also. Now, but if people come for interview, there have been incidents, I will not name. There was an incident in Chandigarh that I tackled in which one of the employers had this issue that almost every other person coming for the interview was fine, but there were a few incidents in which the employees, potential employees who came for interviews were not dressed adequately, not dressed properly, or were passing, or were getting too friendly. That's what they told us at that point of time. How do we deal with such situations in connection to sexual harassment when we do not have an HR or an IC because we're not mandated under law to handle that? How do we deal in such situations? What can the employers, because we have getting a lot of questions on chat also, that how do men protect themselves in these kind of situations?
Okay, there is a local committee. The person can go report, or if this person is a victim, they can put in that's the only option they have. I think Jyotika could add because she would know little more on that. Jyotika?
I guess we lost Jyotika again to some technical. No, Jyotika is there. Jyotika, if you can answer this one, please.
Shilpa?
Shilpa, would you like to add something to this?
Sorry, I had some technical issues. If you could just repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is that at times in smaller companies, smaller offices, which has under 10 employees, there is no IC. And usually there is not a culture of keeping HRs for professionals like CAs, lawyers. Very small law firms don't really have HRs. During the interview sessions, let's say a potential employee comes in, he or she is not dressed properly, and there is an allegation after the employment is denied to such an employee, to such a person. What can the men or the employer do in such conditions?
So, Gaurav, very well said. So here, when we look at a small organization also, I think that's where, when we were talking about the startups as well, that's, a thing that we have to bring in that culture now. I think it's not about having something which is mandated to you and you do it, but it's really a thought process that startups need to also think of, that if I embed this into the organization, and now they're, like we were all discussing, that online learning tools are very reasonable, they can really implement them. So they are actually creating a culture in the organization. That's one aspect of it. The other is, of course, the LCs are always there. So even if you don't have an IC in the organization, there is a local committee that one can go to, and this can be handled at that level as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I guess we yes, Jyotika is back. Jyotika, could you please Just unmuting you.
I'm so sorry, there was a technical glitch. I can't hear you.
Do I need to repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Yes, please do.
Okay. So the question is very simple. Smaller offices, let's say lawyers, CAs, they usually do not have an HR in place. They don't even have, an IC because they're under 10 employees. What do we do in a situation when a potential employee candidate comes for interviews and after the employment is denied, there's a sexual harassment allegation?
One has to verify as to whether there is any truth in that allegation or not. What I have found is that most law offices do have an IC in place, especially the bigger law firms. They do have an IC in place. That's my experience. And I have never really, I've dealt with so many cases in the present, related to sexual harassment. I have never come across a case wherein a potential a person has gone in for an interview and has been sexually harassed by a lawyer and has subsequently raised, a complaint. Whom would they raise a complaint to? Possibly to one of the partners in the law firm itself.
Great. Thank you. There's another question by Gaurav Kakkar. He asked, is there any limit to the compensation? That's also a question by Sabita. When the complaint is proven to be false, and is there any limit to the imprisonment if the IC holds the employer guilty?
Yes. So the compensation is determined on the basis of certain yardsticks that have been clearly written in the rules to the Act. What is the extent of trauma that the person has undergone? Whether there has been any kind of expense that she has incurred on getting certain medical treatment, like psychiatric treatment, because of the trauma that she underwent. Or has there been any loss of career opportunity? Furthermore, the IC will take into consideration what is the pocket of the respondent. There's no point that supposing he's earning 25,000 and I say, okay, he will give a compensation of ₹1,00,000. That's not really happening. So when the IC determines the compensation, it could either be in a lump sum or it could be in installments, keeping in mind all those factors, pertaining to the aggrieved woman as well as to the respondent. Right? Have I answered your question?
Mostly. Anita, there's another question for you now, and I guess even Shilpa can answer this one easily. So today we are in the category of the times that we have Zoom calls, Google, Cisco WebEx, everything, and usually all these calls are recorded. Let's say it is an odd timing. There's a question on email that we received, so it's a rather long question. It says, let's say it's an odd timing today, and we record a session without the permission of the female employees. Are there any repercussions for that?
I think first of all, you cannot record any video without asking permission of be it a male or female. That's very clear. When you're recording, it says, please inform the participants of whoever you're recording. I think you're not supposed to. And yeah, what's the repercussions? Yeah, person can go and raise a concern saying that I'm not comfortable with it. Please withdraw it. Yes, person can go and request for that. Legally, I don't know, Jyotika can answer that. What is the repercussion on that?
Yes, you're not allowed to record without having first sought permission from the person whose voice or evidence or whatsoever you want to record. You need to take prior permission.
Great, thank you. We're mostly done with questions. There's just one last question. I suppose all of you can answer that collectively. There have been some incidents on Zoom or other platforms where there are people discussing something about women, or it's a professional space, or comments are passed, the chats are lured. How do you deal with such situations? There was an incident a few days ago over Zoom that people were discussing something about women. A lot of women were offended. Can we deal with such situations? This I know may not be related to Posh. Just to end on a note, that how do we deal with such situations that have now arisen in the digital times?
This takes me back to the boys' locker room controversy, right? So there are so many people on a social media platform wherein they are discussing young students, girls who are underage. They are morphing faces on, naked bodies and other things, and they are discussing certain aspects related to their sexuality. Likewise, now we come on platforms such as Zoom. People may or may not be connected, as in they may be from the same workplace, they may not be from the same workplace. In certain cases, we have seen that the National Commission for Women takes suo motu cognizance of such cases and deals with them. In certain cases, we have seen that the cyber police jumps into action and also takes cognizance of it and cracks the whip on the perpetrators. Because nobody can be allowed to get away with just saying what they want to on social media platforms or on things like Zoom also. It has an element of threat and intimidation.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, just one last question, I suppose, to Shilpa. It is, how can we educate school students regarding Posh?
So there is POXO at the school level, but there is Posh also at senior school level. So actually, a lot of schools now, colleges are now educating people through a lot of online material, online e-learning material, so that people are aware, kids are aware of this before they're actually stepping into the corporate world, so that they know how to deal with these things. They know that there is somebody that they can go to. They can also demand that an organization has this in place. And I think so we are moving with the times, and I think that would be very interesting, where actually a student wants to join only those organizations who have these required policies in place, which make sure that you're secure, you're working in a good environment, you're taken care of. And I think that is the times that one is hoping to get into now.
Can I say here that the definition of the term workplace includes schools and universities? Right? So the moment we talk about Posh, we have been talking, No Rape India is in the process of speaking to legislators and is reaching out to the government, is submitting papers and is doing a lot of work so that we can take Posh to every single school student mandatorily, starting from class 5 to class 12. Also, the Posh session will be delivered to the parents of those school-going children, be it girls and boys, right? No report cards will be handed over till such time that they have undertaken that Posh training. So we are hoping and praying that there will be a change in the mindset of the people, that whole patriarchal, misogynistic bias will shift to a more egalitarian and a gender-neutral society.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Anita. Thanks, Shilpa. Thanks, Jyotika. Vinta has already left, and Bhupender for coming today online with us. Thank you to all the participants for joining us today. Next week, we have a session on POXO at the same time with different people. We thank No Rape India for including us in this initiative. We're happy to be partners with them for the ongoing series. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All those people who want invites, we'll be sending out, we can always check Lawyers Club India on Facebook or Twitter, or you can just check No Rape India's Facebook page. You can subscribe to that and you'll get all the live invites and all updates as to the ongoing sessions. We do have a CRPC masterclass coming up on Saturday and Sunday. So if you want to find out more, please connect to Lawyers Club India. Thank you so much.